In this film, we're going to explain how your body processes the food you eat in order to provide all your body cells with the energy they need. And also what happens when you have diabetes and this system doesn't work properly.
Glucose, oh sugar, sugar, you are my favorite fuel from the blood-borne substrate pool. Glucose, monosaccharide sugar, you're sweeter than a woman's kiss, 'cause I need you for glycolysis. I just can't believe the way my muscles take you in. For you to open the door, all it takes is a little bit of insulin to upregulate glucose. Oh, glucose, oh, sugar, sugar, you help me make ATP when my predators are chasing me. Oh, glucose, you're an aldehyde sugar.
When our body is working normally, the foods we eat, containing proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, are broken down into simpler, easily absorbed nutrients. One of the carbohydrates is a form of simple sugar called glucose. It is the main source of energy for the body's cells.
Every object in this universe is either a source of energy or a consumer of it, or both. This energy is spent to move on. The living organisms of this universe require constant source of energy for life and to move on with various physical and biological activities of life. We gather this energy by eating food. We basically eat three types of food, namely carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. As we all know, petrol and diesel are two major fuels for automobile. Similarly, two major fuels for human life are glucose, that comes from carbohydrate metabolism, and free fatty acid, that comes out of fat metabolism. On the other hand, amino acids from proteins are utilized by the body for bodybuilding processes and for the synthesis of various hormones and enzymes. In this section, we will discuss carbohydrate as a source of energy. What is a carbohydrate? Carbohydrates are compounds which have one or more than one glucose molecules in their structure. Depending on the number of glucose molecules in their structure, they are classified as monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. Carbohydrates make an important part of our food as they are the instant source of energy for our body.
During and immediately after a meal, our body begins to break down food molecules, including carbohydrates, into sugar molecules, one of which is glucose. Glucose is a simple sugar that provides the fuel that every cell in your body needs to survive. After we eat, glucose is absorbed directly into the bloodstream, and our blood sugar levels rise sharply. This sends a signal to the beta cells of the pancreas, instructing them to secrete just the right amount of insulin to manage the sugar.
and it's insulin that helps our body get the energy from the food we eat.
After looking at the utilization of glucose by the body, now let's understand what is glucose homeostasis, or how glucose level is maintained within a normal range in the blood. Maintaining this range is critical as our brain cannot survive without glucose for more than few minutes, and other vital body organs cannot stand a high level of glucose for long, despite periods of fasting and feasting. In healthy individuals, the plasma glucose is maintained between a narrow range of 70 to 120 mg per deciliter. Insulin does not allow glucose to go high, as it brings down extra glucose within normal range. And glucagon does not allow glucose to fall below normal range. This way, insulin and glucagon strikes a balance. Let's understand now how glucose level is maintained within a normal range by two important hormones, insulin and glucagon. After a meal, when there is high level of glucose in blood, glucose enters into the cell and undergoes glycolysis. Glycolysis is the process by which glucose is converted into ATPs. So glycolysis reduces blood glucose level. When enough of ATPs are generated, extra amount of glucose undergoes glycogenesis. Glycogenesis is the process by which glucose is converted into glycogen and stored in the liver or muscle cells. So glycogenesis is the process which helps in reducing blood sugar level. Both these processes are responsible to bring down blood glucose after meal. On the other hand, during fasting, when there is low level of glucose in blood, a process called gluconeogenesis is activated. Gluconeogenesis is a process by which glucose is produced from non-carbohydrate sources like fat and proteins, thus increasing blood glucose level. Another process involved in increasing blood glucose during fasting is glycogenolysis, the process of breaking down glycogen into glucose. Insulin decreases blood glucose after food. That means insulin activates glycolysis and glycogenesis. On the other hand, glucagon increases blood glucose during fasting. That means glucagon activates gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis. The final outcome of all these four metabolic processes happening over 24 hours a day is attaining normoglycemia. By and large, insulin and glucagon are the two most important hormones responsible for attaining normoglycemia.
The pancreas is shown here with the foreground highly magnified to reveal its inner anatomy. 99% of pancreatic tissue is composed of acinar glands, which secrete an alkaline digestive juice into the duodenum via the pancreatic duct to help digest food. The endocrine areas of the pancreas, known as the islets of Langerhans, are composed of two major types of cell. The alpha cells secrete the hormone glucagon, and the beta cells secrete insulin into the bloodstream. These hormones work in opposition to control the blood glucose level. Insulin promotes the uptake and usage of glucose in the tissues, particularly skeletal muscle and fat, and reduces glucose production in the liver. Glucagon has an anti-insulin effect in the liver, increasing glucose release.
In this animation, we will see how a beta cell secretes insulin. Glucose transporters GLUT2 located on the beta cell surface paves the way for glucose from outside to inside the beta cells. In the mitochondria of the beta cells, these glucose molecules are then converted into energy-producing ATP molecules. Once production of these ATP molecules reach threshold, ATP-dependent potassium channels get closed. As a result, voltage-gated calcium channels get open, and calcium ions from extracellular space come inside the beta cells. These calcium ions then bind with the insulin-containing secretory vesicles located inside the beta cells. In turn, these secretory vesicles secrete insulin through the process of exocytosis, and insulin reaches blood circulation.
Your blood glucose levels rise, and your pancreas responds by releasing more insulin to move the glucose into your cells.
Insulin dominates postprandial state metabolism of glucose and decreases glucose level in blood. Insulin is also known as the hormone of plenty. Insulin increases glucose uptake by muscles and adipose cells. Insulin helps cells to break down glucose, releasing its energy in the form of ATP. Insulin helps liver and muscles to store glucose as glycogen. Insulin helps adipose tissues to store glucose as fat. Insulin helps in protein synthesis. Insulin is the only hormone that lowers circulating glucose level. Let us see now where all insulin affects. Insulin acts on the muscle cells and increases glucose uptake, glycolysis, and glycogenesis in the muscles. Thereby, insulin brings plasma glucose level back to normal. Insulin also acts on the adipose cells. In the adipose cells, insulin increases lipogenesis, that is, formation of triglycerides from glucose, and thereby insulin brings plasma glucose level back to normal. Insulin also acts on the liver and inhibits glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Thereby, insulin brings plasma glucose level back to normal. Glucose transporters are the carriers of glucose. They carry glucose from outside the cell to inside the cell. There are insulin-dependent and insulin-independent glucose transporters. Glucose transporters, those are situated in the beta cell of pancreas, are insulin-independent transporters. They are also known as GLUT2. Glucose transporters, those are situated in the skeletal muscle cells or adipose cells, are insulin-dependent transporters. They are also known as GLUT4.
The bloodstream then takes the glucose and the insulin to every cell in our body that needs it. To make this easier to understand, let's look at muscle cells. At the muscle cells, it's insulin that allows the glucose to get into the cells where it can be used for energy. It's a bit like insulin is a key unlocking the door to the cells so the glucose can get in. That way, the blood glucose level starts to drop. But the blood glucose level can be topped up at any point by the liver releasing extra glucose that it has stored. the blood glucose rises again, and again the pancreas produces more insulin to move with that glucose through the bloodstream to the muscle cells, open the doors and let the glucose in. The body functions best with the blood glucose at an optimum level. It doesn't like it if the blood glucose rises too high. Normally, there's a cycle within the body which balances out the glucose and the insulin level, and this is achieved by the food you eat, the pancreas and the liver.
Slight drops in blood sugar levels stimulate glucagon secretion and inhibit insulin secretion. Glucagon stimulates the liver and muscles to break down stored glycogen and release glucose. This interplay helps to keep our blood glucose concentration constant at about 90 mg per deciliter of blood.
Unlike insulin, glucagon dominates fasting state metabolism of glucose and increases glucose level in blood. Glucagon secreted from the alpha cells of pancreas, and its major target organ for its action is liver. Glucagon stimulates production of glucose by glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. Glucagon prevents hypoglycemia by increasing cell production of glucose, principal hormone for producing a rapid increase in plasma glucose concentration. Glucagon secretion is suppressed in hyperglycemia, and glucagon's actions are opposite to those of insulin. Let us halt for a second and think, what if there is impaired insulin secretion or action or increased glucagon action? Well, from the backdrop of our understanding about the role of insulin and glucagon in glucose homeostasis, we know the answer, and the answer is hyperglycemia.